Hello, fellow students of Microbiology 130 and Professor. My name is Jinson. You guys can also call me Jay. Today I will be presenting on the mad cow disease. So the scientific name of this pathogen is bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Sorry, I had to take it really slow because it's kind of hard to pronounce. But for me to understand things, it's easier to break words down. So why don't we break down this disease, also known as BSE? So bovine is going to be related to cattle. Spongiform means having a porous structure or consistency resembling a sponge. And encephalopathy, encephalopathy is the neurodegenerative disease. So basically what it means is that this disease is going to turn your brain into a sponge-like. So it's going to degenerate and you're actually going to have porous areas like a sponge. As you can see in the picture I've used for the background, the white spots are going to be the missing portions of the brain cells. And specifically this disease, BSE, is only affected in cattle. We'll get to that later, but you guys should know that this disease only affects cattle. So the mad cow disease, if you were to classify it, well, let's start off with the basics. What it is a prion. And a prion is actually a shorthand word for proteinaceous infectious particle, which was first coined by a gentleman named Stanley B. Prusiner in 1982. And a prion is an abnormally folded protein. They're kind of similar with the word structure, with the PR and the N, protein and prion. And the prion is going to be mostly located in the nervous system tissue. So how do we classify this microorganism? I don't necessarily think we can, because starting from the top with the kingdom, it doesn't really fall under one of the 6 normal groups, because this is just an abnormal protein. As we've learned so far, the 6 kingdoms are going to be the Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, Protista, Animalia, Plantae, and fungi. So because this disease is technically a protein, I can't really say that it would fall under one of the 6 categories for kingdoms. So I'm just going to call it an abnormal type of infection kingdom, if I had to classify it. So what are the characteristics of mad cow disease? Through my research, I found that it's small. It's like really small. It's so small that you have to use an electron microscope just to see it. But even at that point, it would have to be aggregated and in a cluster just for you to see it. So it's going to be really difficult to see a single instance of this disease. As I said before, it's an abnormal protein. So the body doesn't recognize it as an invasion or an attack. So the immune system is not going to respond to it at all. And the prion is just going to be slightly different than the protein, I guess you could say, as far as structure goes. You'll see in the next slide. So here I have a little illustration of a prion compared to a protein. Now, as we can see on the left is a regular protein, and you can see with the green and the red, it's going to be like alpha helices. And then the prion, it's going to be stretched and really dense beta sheets. So that is the physical characteristics of a prion. So that's going to encompass mad cow disease, that it has these little sheets instead of being coils. So what are the effects this disease has on the cow? I just want to start off with saying that the origin is technically unknown. I don't mean that we don't know 100% that where it does come from, but we have theories, but we can't really say for certain where it comes from. There are a couple debatable theories, and I'll get into that later. But for the cows, how does this affect them? So it's going to degenerate their brains. So what are the symptoms? What are the things you'll see in a cow? Well, the cow is going to get progressively deteriorating behavioral and neurological signs. So it's going to be, you know, not up to standard levels of mental capacity. And then there's going to be an increase in aggression, hence the name mad cow, because it's going to be like angry and aggressive. Physically, the cows are also going to make a lot less milk, and this is a fatal disease. So once contracted, the cows will die. Okay, so what are the effects of mad cow disease on humans? Well, we have to really distinguish that mad cow disease is only specifically affecting cows. But there is a really high chance of contraction of a similar type of disease, you would say. So in humans, this disease is going to be called the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. So it's not that a human would have mad cow disease. It's that if a human consumed a cow that had mad cow disease, it's really likely that the person will develop the CJD. So the humans have a separate disease that falls in the same family, but it's not technically the same disease. But in humans, it's going to be similar symptoms as in cows. So you'll have decrease in coordination, impaired memory, judgment, and thinking. A really obvious sign is going to be dementia in people. There's just going to be a really severe mental impairment. And then physically, how you'll see this is at really bad cases or really late stages, there's going to be myoclonus, which is going to be involuntary muscle jerks in humans. So again, I just want to clarify that humans' form of the disease is going to be the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, not mad cow disease. So I mentioned earlier that this disease is not the same between cows and humans. So it's going to be the same case for other animals. So the way we should look at this is that mad cow disease falls under a family. And this family is known as the transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. So it also affects other animals, but when it's in the case of other animals, we're going to call it different diseases. So for example, the feline spongiform encephalopathy is going to affect cats. Then you've got the transmissible mink encephalopathy that's going to affect minks. Scrapie is going to be the same type of disease, but in sheep and goats. And for the deer, elk, and moose, that one is going to be called chronic wasting disease. I just wanted to talk about CJD one more time before we move on, since this is the one that mostly affects us, even though I'm supposed to be presenting on the DSE. But anyhow, so there are 3 categories of the disease that affects the humans. And the first is going to be sporadic CJD. And this happens for no particular reason. I guess you could say it's spontaneous. But anyways, because this is an abnormal protein, you could consider it probably just a mutation that occurs in the off chance in people. But the interesting thing to note is that this actually accounts for 85% of cases that are recorded. So you're more likely to get this disease by rare chance than the following 2 categories. So the second category is going to be hereditary. So if somebody in your family had it, you could have a chance of getting it as well. But again, this only counts for 5 to 10% of cases. And the last one is going to be the acquired CJD, which is the most prevalent in the media, but honestly, it only accounts for 5 to 10% of cases. So yes, there are concerns about eating infected meat, but as an overall picture, the chances are pretty slim. Now, what's interesting about this disease in humans is how you diagnose it and how you get to that diagnosis. So when the doctors are first gonna assume that maybe you have dementia, maybe it's treatable. So they're gonna go through all those methods of scanning your brain, whether it's through EEG or an MRI. And it's not really until the really late stages of this disease that you can truly classify it as CJD. But even on top of that, the only way to know with 100% certainty that the individual has CJD is through an autopsy. So you can only do it when the person is dead, then you can cut the brain. But there's even in that it's very specific, because if the doctor doesn't get the right part of the brain or gets a different section of it, it may not have the disease. So they'd have to do a very thorough inspection. And from my research, this is really, they don't really want to do it either, because the chance of them getting infected while they do the autopsy is pretty high. So they have to practice really extreme measures of sterilization and keeping themselves safe. So yeah, I just wanted to brush up on the CJD before we move on. So here I have a map showing the disease and the areas in the world where it's been affected. So take note that I have light green and dark green areas. So the light green areas are going to be areas with confirmed cases of mad cow disease, the BSE. And dark green is going to be confirmed cases of the human form of this disease, the CJD. For the mad cow disease, looks like we've got Sweden, Finland, probably Germany and Poland, maybe Greece, and this little one I think is Oman. And then right on the really, really bottom left, I think the small portion of the southern America, that little island separate. And then for the human cases, CJD, definitely most of North America. You've got Western Europe, I think UK and it's going to be affected, France and Spain, Thailand and Japan were definitely affected. But again, these are only confirmed cases, so other countries may have had this disease in humans or animals. They just don't have the proper tools, I guess, to classify or to even report it. So this disease really came into the spotlight in the 1980s when there were just thousands of cases. I think it was like 1,000 cases per week of infection. There was a really big outbreak, and it kind of happened starting in the UK in the 1980s. The professor mentioned to me that she visited around that time period, and she was bummed out that she couldn't eat the meat, even though she was traveling. But I guess it was for the best, because she's still kicking it today and still an awesome teacher. But yeah, so for the first case in the US that we had was in 2003 of December of the BSE. So a cow was infected. So that was like, oh no, what did we do? That was a really bad thing to happen. So we definitely destroyed that cow ASAP and all the other affected cow. So as I mentioned earlier, the origin hasn't been confirmed. It's just really debatable. But one of the more prevalent theories that we have is that the cows were being infected because of what they were being fed. And they were being fed with MBM, meat bone meal. So I think you could say that cows were being fed with other cow parts. And this kind of could be true, because you kind of get this disease if you eat or if you consume infected tissue. So it would make sense if cows were being fed infected cows, and that's how the cases were being so prevalent. So because of this, a lot of the governments had to ban the sale of beef, and they had to enforce termination of the infected cattle. So what does that mean in terms of treatment and cures? Well, for the time being, it doesn't seem like there are going to be any treatments or cures available because this disease is fatal. Yeah, that's kind of a bummer. But again, I think this goes back to how I was trying to classify this disease is really an abnormal protein, so the body doesn't really think of it as something that's bad. So that's why it's kind of a sad case, because once you get it, there's really no turning back. It's just dependent on how long it will take to hit a really severe case. But research does continue to this day. Hopefully we'll come up with something. I hope that we can at least try to come up with ways of detection, at least, so that we can continue to eat our beef products, because I like steak. Not to make anybody paranoid, but this disease is like a 1-2 punch. First of all, you can't detect it in the blood. And second, it doesn't manifest and become symptomatic until way down the line. We're talking years before you have, noticeable symptoms. But that doesn't mean that we don't have any preventative measures. For example, if you had lived in an area that had confirmed cases of mad cow disease, you're not allowed to donate blood, at least when it comes to the U.S. That's just to protect those involved. The United States Department of Agriculture also prohibits the importation of live cattle from countries where the mad cow disease is known to exist. And other European countries have imposed similar restrictions in the late 1990s. And finally, the Food and Drug Administration of the US prohibits the use of most animal protein in the animal feed given to cattle. So I think this kind of perpetuates that theory where cows were eating infected cow tissue back in the 1980s and perhaps earlier. Again, this is never going to be confirmed. It's just kind of like, if the federal department has to step in to tell farmers to stop doing it, it's got to be pretty bad. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you guys have any questions, and thank you for listening to my PowerPoint presentation. Thanks, guys. Bye.